Maccast, Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. Hey, Mac Geeks, it's time for your Maccast, the show for Mac Geeks by Mac Geeks. I'm Adam, and this is the show where we discuss all things Macintosh. How you doing? Welcome back to the Maccast. Glad to be back here with you. I have been able to sort out my audio problems that I was talking to you about in the last episode of the Maccast. So, ordered up a bunch of new gear, kind of rebuilt the studio from scratch, and we are back here with you for another episode of the Maccast. I guess I should talk a little bit about the equipment that I put together. I think I mentioned on the last episode that one of the big pieces of gear that I've used for years is a mic preamp processor called a DBX286A. And I'm bringing this up because I know there's some of you out there who are into this kind of stuff. I received some emails and some great advice from a bunch of people in our community. So I've had this 286A for years. I actually bought it used from another podcaster, and that piece of equipment, basically I think the power supply has gone out on it or went out on it, and that caused all my audio issues. So I actually replaced that with the updated version of the same unit. DBX286S is the new model. So I was able to drop that into place, and then also took the time to replace not only that piece of equipment, but also my audio interface, the thing that I was using to basically convert the analog signal into digital. So I upgraded that to a Mo2 M4. I was using a Zoom H4n, just a USB audio interface. This new one is USB-C, so more in line with my current MacBook Pro setup. And then also took the time to replace my mic arm and a bunch of other stuff. Still on the same original microphone, which is an Audio-Technica AT2020. So kind of, getting into a little audio technical stuff here at the top of the show. But again, I know there's a number of you out there who were curious about it. I don't talk about my setup too much or how I do my podcast. So a little inside information for you at the top of the show this week. But looking over the show notes, we have a ton of great stuff to get into this week, including Apple's quarterly results. Yeah, Apple had a quarterly results call. And as you might imagine, it was pretty good. So we're going to go through those numbers. I'll let you know just how good they are. We're going to talk about iPads versus iMacs. The executives got up and talked about some of their strategies moving forward. So you may be curious about that. We're going to talk about what's coming up next for iPhone. A little bit of zero-day exploit news that came out this week. Yeah, and do you need to be concerned about that or not? We have some Apple TV Plus stuff, including a new documentary that Apple is going to be working on. Apple Silicon, what's next for that? And also give you a little update on Siri remotes, and we'll round things out with some Apple Music news and information. Maybe a change coming to Apple Music that might interest some of you. And then we're going to get into some new products. I got a new product from Apple this week, as you might imagine, the AirTag. So I'll give you my first impression of the AirTag and the experience, and just some updates on AirTags, some information that now that they're out in the wild, we're hearing a little bit more about their capabilities and functionality. And then, and I've talked about this in the past, it's really interesting. I get feedback every week, and it always is interesting to me that there often are patterns in your questions. I get a lot of people asking similar questions or questions around a similar category. And I don't know if that's just my own information bias or if that's something that really goes on, but I'll let you be the judge, because this week I got a couple questions about libraries, basically photo libraries and how to work with those, and then also a question about the podcast library. So we'll try to help a couple people out with their libraries. We'll talk about media backup and those sorts of things, which is a little bit of a follow-up to some of the discussion we've been having about, do you own your media library? So we have some more media information and feedback to deliver you in this episode of the Backcast, and that will round everything out. So it should be a great episode. Let's just dive right in with Apple's quarterly results. So Apple had their second quarterly results call for the year, and things turned out really, really well for them. Seems like most quarters lately they've been breaking records, but this past quarter, Apple was at it again and once again had amazing, amazing numbers. Apple reported $89.6 billion in revenue in the past quarter with profit of $23.6 billion. That's a 54% increase year over year. 54% is just unbelievable. And they had records for Mac and services revenue as well. So those definitely contributing. iPhone didn't do too shabby either. iPhone revenue was up 65% at $47.94 billion. Mac revenue up a whopping 70%. And you have to imagine that the M1 Max really helped out with that. $9.1 billion in revenue. We generally don't see those kinds of numbers for Mac, or we haven't been seeing those kinds of numbers. So definitely Mac has been rejuvenated by what Apple is doing with Apple Silicon in the M1. iPad revenue up 79% at $7.81 billion. And again, some of this trending is continuing trends from the whole pandemic issue, people working from home, companies needing to get more equipment, those sorts of things. So Apple still seeing a boost from that, I would imagine, as well. Wearables, home, and accessories were up 24% at $7.84 billion, and services up 26% at $16.9 billion. So overall, very, very, very good quarter for Apple. Probably not too surprising if you're in the Apple community, but nice to see nonetheless. Other highlights from the call, Apple says they now have 660 million paid subscriptions across all of their services. Unfortunately, they don't break those down for us, so we don't know which things people are subscribing to, but they have been building up their services business, and there are a lot of options now, including the new Apple One plans, so those are probably helping out. Basically, those numbers are up 40 million from last quarter, so they've gained 40 million paid subscribers across all their services from quarter to quarter, which is a nice jump up. Already mentioned that a lot of sales and revenue coming from iPad and Mac. As a matter of fact, Apple says 50% of iPad and Mac sales went to new customers to those devices. Also, 75% of Apple Watch purchases in the past quarter were to first-time Apple Watch owners. So that's good for the long-term longevity of Apple's products. If you've got new people coming to devices and products coming into the market, chances are they're going to be upgrading at some point. So anytime Apple can build those numbers, that's ultimately a good thing for the long term. Speaking of long term and looking toward the next quarter, it should be okay for Apple, although they did warn that because of chip shortages, it is likely to affect Mac and iPad supplies moving into the third quarter. We're also expecting that, we're going to hear announcements of the new Pro Max, and those should be coming. So expect those supplies to also be impacted. And I know there's a lot of you in our community who are waiting for the new Pro systems. Just know they might take a little while to get a hold of once they are finally released. So if you are in the market for that, just be ready for it. But Apple doing very, very well in the second quarter, and the numbers definitely reflecting that. With the M1 now in both the iPad and the Mac, as you might imagine, there's a lot of conversation, and I've actually received a lot of emails from people who are more convinced than ever that Apple products are on a collision course, that the iPads and the Macs are going to merge at some point, that Apple is going to merge the operating systems, and we are going to have a single device that sort of encompasses both touch and desktop and everything that we've had. And I would say that's a logical conclusion looking at what's happening with the hardware. But pretty much Apple has said, nope, that's not the direction we're moving in. It's never going to be that way. And I know these are famous last words, right? When was the last time we heard someone, an executive at Apple, say never? Oh, remember Steve Jobs and the video iPod? And then promptly Apple came out with a video iPod. So, I think time can change a lot of things, but at least for now, they're sticking with that company line that no, we are not going to merge them. Apple VP of Marketing Greg Joswiak and their hardware chief John Turnus did an interview recently for The Independent, and they explained that the products are not in conflict, because I guess that's another thing is folks are wondering, aren't you sort of competing with yourself with the M1 iPad and the M1 Max? They're saying, nope, they're not in conflict, and they're not intended to merge at any point soon. And they said, quote, we're quite proud of the fact that we work really, really hard to create the best products in their respective categories. So Apple's still really seeing these devices as fitting into separate categories. And they claim that the reason that the iPad was moved to the M1 was that, hey, the iPad Pro has always just had the best Apple silicon available. And now M1 is the best Apple silicon. It was the A4 or the A series processor rather at A14. And now it's the M1. So we're moving to the M1 in the iPad Pro, and it's just as simple as that. And we're going to keep the operating system separate and it's separate experience, and that's the way it's going to be. Apple did clarify that also the old 12.9-inch Magic Keyboard does actually technically work with the new M1 12.9-inch iPad Pro. This was something that came up after the announcement. A number of outlets were saying that you had to get the new, and maybe even myself included, because I think I read this, that you would have to get a new Magic Keyboard to work with the new iPad because it's just a little bit thicker because of the mini LED backlighting. So that extra thickness means that Apple created a new specific Magic Keyboard for that. Apple came out this past week or so and clarified that nope, you can still use the Magic Keyboard, the old 12.9-inch Magic Keyboard. It will technically work, but the fit won't be quite as precise. And if you add a screen protector, it's going to be even a little bit more difficult. So basically closing it, it's that extra thickness. It's not going to quite fit exactly right. So if that's important to you and you're thinking about upgrading and you already have a 12.9-inch Magic Keyboard, you might still consider buying the new one. But if you don't want to do it, sounds like you might be able to get away with not having to upgrade. We already talked quite a bit over the past few months about what this year's iPhone is going to look like, the iPhone 13, iPhone 13 Pro, but now analysts are starting to look even further into the future and look at what our 2022 iPhone may look like. So Ming-Chi Kuo came out this week and said, we can expect an iPhone with a 48 megapixel camera. That is a massive jump in megapixels, so very, very interesting. He said supposedly that camera will be coming to the iPhone 14 Pro, the iPhone 14 Pro Max. He also suggested that the iPhone would offer 8K video recording. So if you're looking for the really next generation of Apple's cameras, sounding like it's going to be coming in 2022. He also suggested that Apple's mixed reality headset is going to be coming in the second quarter of 2022 as well. We've been talking about Apple's AR VR headset. A lot of speculation on when that product might be coming out. Now, Ming-Chi Kuo says second quarter of 2022, but a recent DigiTimes report claimed that Apple has not entered their second phase of development testing on their headset product, and that could affect the schedule. They were reportedly going to start working on improving the weight and the battery. If you remember, Apple is supposedly targeting something like a 300-gram weight for their headset, which would be much, much lighter than current competing headsets that they would be going up against. And they would need to get into second phase testing fairly soon to kind of hit some of the targets we've been hearing about for the second quarter of 2022. They're supposedly, though, working on several types of headsets. So this report from DigiTimes wasn't very clear on which headset was delayed. They just said Apple's headset didn't get into its second phase of testing. So we don't know which headset they're talking about. So we're going to kind of take this one with a grain of salt. Generally, Ming-Chi Kuo seems to be pretty on top of what's happening with Apple. So if he's currently saying second quarter of 2022, that's probably what Apple is targeting right now, regardless of where they're at with their development phase and testing. Who knows, though, if, again, the component shortages, chip shortages, and all those sorts of things might impact that timeline. So it's kind of really too early to tell, but we really do know that Apple is working hard on that first headset product. Reportedly going to be much more a AR kind of VR headset product, mixed reality product, more like a lot of folks are saying the Microsoft HoloLens. So think something like that. And then at some point they are planning kind of, as we've discussed, more of an AR kind of glasses type product, but that's further out in the development cycle. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But 2022 could be very, very interesting for a whole new category of products from Apple. A little bit of frightening news this week, I think, if you're concerned at all about the privacy and security of your personal information as it relates to your Apple products. And I think most of us probably are concerned about that. But some tech researchers at the University of Germany revealed a potential exploit in AirDrop that could expose that information, including things like your phone number and your email address. And this exploit is predicated on top of basically the default setting with AirDrop that says make AirDrop available, or just AirDrop discovery available, really, to anybody in my contacts, that contacts only setting. And it has to do with how that feature, how AirDrop actually compares and figures out if you are in somebody else's contacts. Basically uses a hashing algorithm, and that is used, basically it broadcasts part of that as part of AirDrop, like a portion of it, and then it checks to see, hey, is there a potential match in the other person's contacts? And if there's a potential match, then it sends another version of that, another hashed version of that, with your full phone number and email address in it. And it's that handshake that happens where the potential danger is, or where the exposure is. This is what they've leveraged to take advantage of with this exploit. And they're saying the issue is that that hashing can be too easily reversed to figure out what your phone number and what your email address is. The hashes, they say, can easily be cracked using current techniques, which basically involves taking that hash and comparing it to a known list of hashed phone numbers and email addresses. And they say it can take milliseconds to look up a phone number hash from a pre-computed database containing results for all the possible phone numbers in the world. So this is kind of, I think they call this a waterfall, basically brute force hacking. And so they take the hashed thing that is in AirDrop, that AirDrop is sending across, and they compare that to an entire list of phone numbers that are already hashed. And when they find a match, they know, hey, that's the phone number. Similar thing for the emails. They say the emails can be cracked by using the billions of email addresses that have already been exposed through other data breaches over the past year. So you can go on the dark web, they can get these lists of hashed email addresses, have them in a big giant list, and they just need to compare those very quickly. So you can imagine someone sitting in a coffee shop watching this traffic go back and forth. And what happens is with AirDrop, anytime you open up the share sheet, whether you're using AirDrop or not, this handshake thing goes on. And they're saying that's where the flaw is. That's where the security concern is. And the researchers actually notified Apple about this flaw back in May of 2019, and the flaw still exists. So they're talking about it now. So that's what it is. You know, as far as do we need to be concerned, or do we need to be really worried about this? It seems highly unlikely that someone would want to take the time to target most users just to discover a phone number and an email address. Could it happen? Absolutely. They've done proof of concept. They have this working. They know it will work. An easy way around it, of course, would be to simply turn off AirDrop, set it to no one can access your information, and that would lock it down. So there's an easy way for you to prevent this from happening. Again, I'm not overly concerned about this personally, but it's out there, and it's hopefully something that Apple will address. These security researchers already have developed and created a different version of this handshake that they say is much more secure. So they know it's possible for Apple to secure this more. Why Apple hasn't done it so far yet is kind of a question, and we'll have to see how they respond to this one if they put out an update. But speaking of security updates, macOS 11.3 does contain a pretty significant security update that you probably want to know about. There's some big zero-day security exploits that macOS 11.3 patches. Basically, there was an exploit that could suppress 3 security features in macOS that would generally prevent malware from being able to be installed. And those 3 features are file quarantine, which requires explicit user confirmation when you download a file from the internet. So you've probably seen this. Download a file from the internet and it tries to run or install. The operating system warned you about it. So this exploit can bypass that. Gatekeeper, which also blocks the installation of apps unless they're signed by developers who are known to Apple, that is able to be bypassed by this exploit as well. And mandatory app notarization, which permits the app to be installed only after Apple has scanned it for malware. So there was a zero-day exploit that could bypass all of those security features. So pretty nasty thing. It was patched in macOS 11.3. So if you haven't updated to that yet, you're going to want to grab that, run your software update. It's also worth noting that Apple put out security patches for Catalina and Mojave as well. So if you're on one of the older operating systems, you can also get patched up. So probably a pretty good thing to go in and get updated. And hopefully Apple will address the AirDrop thing now that that has become a little more public. I would say a pretty big category of content that is on Apple TV Plus is documentaries. A lot of award-winning documentaries and really, really great stuff. Apple has done a great job, I think, on Apple TV Plus with their non-scripted content. And this week we heard about another piece coming to Apple TV Plus on May 21st. It's a music documentary called 1971, The Year That Music Changed Everything. And it will focus on what Apple says is, quote, exploring the musicians and soundtracks that shaped the culture and politics of 1971. It's a film from Universal Music Group's Mercury Studios and On the Corner Films, and it will look at icons including the Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin, Bob Marley, Marvin Gaye, The Who, Joni Mitchell, Lou Reed, and more. So some amazing, amazing people in music. And 1971, I guess, was a very big year. So if you're into music, you're into documentaries, mark your calendar, May 21st. You might want to check that one out. And then also the award continues to march on. And this past week, 3 Apple TV Plus series came up for nominations in the British Academy of Film and Television Arts Awards, the BAFTA Awards. Little America, Tiny World, and Earth at Night in Color, all receiving nominations. I think when Apple announced the new M1 iMac last week or a couple weeks ago, I guess at this point, a number of us were a little bit surprised that they didn't bump up the M1 series processor, that it got the same M1 that Apple had already put into the Mac Mini, the MacBook Air, and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, after the announcement, I think I understood where Apple was going with it because the new 24-inch iMac looks very much like a consumer-focused product, but that left us wondering, when are we going to see the next generation of Apple Silicon? And according to Nikkei Asia, the M2 or potentially the M1X should be entering production right about now, right about the time you're hearing this podcast, which they say means that the processors could be ready to start shipping as early as July. If the timeline is correct, that means we might expect to see the next generation of MacBook Pros and maybe iMacs or iMac Pros if they bring that model back with Apple Silicon in the second half of the year. That seems to be the timeline that we've been sort of lining up. I would expect sometime in the fall that we get an announcement of those machines. Bloomberg has already reported that Apple could be looking to push the number of cores in their next generation of Apple Silicon up to 20 to 32 cores for its Pro systems. So currently, the M1 has 8 CPU cores and 8 GPU cores. For this next generation processor, we could see 12 or more CPU cores and potentially 16 or more GPU cores. So we're looking to see a very, very powerful Pro-level processor coming from Apple that's really going to take Apple Silicon to the next level, and I am super, super excited about it. We're also hearing that they could at least double the RAM in that processor, so the current processors come with 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of that unified memory. We could see 16 gigabytes and 32 gigabytes as the option with the Pro systems, and that would be in line with and kind of make sense for what I would expect to see. We're also expecting to see more ports on the updated 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros with the return of things like MagSafe, SD card slots, and HDMI ports. I think Apple has heard enough from their Pro-level customers that those are really the ports that they need on a Pro-level system, and we do expect those to return. So I would expect that the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, when they receive their updates, probably in the fall, are going to sell a lot of units. I'm going to be a little bit jealous. I have the current 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is amazing. I won't be looking to upgrade anytime soon, but the thought of getting some Apple Silicon is very, very tempting, I have to say, and especially if all of these specs turn out to be true. I think when Apple announced the new update to the Apple TV at their last event, the item that kind of stole the thunder from the Apple TV was the new Siri remote. Everybody's super excited about finally getting an updated Siri remote, something that has physical buttons, doesn't have the kind of clunky trackpad interface, has that cool little jog wheel and actual directional buttons, as well as a power button and, all of that sort of stuff. So bunch of new features and updates to the Siri remote that a lot of people are excited about. But there was kind of one feature that didn't get mentioned, and that is, remotes get lost all the time. And especially the Siri remote, which is rather small. People often complain about it going missing. And another big part of the event was the whole AirTags announcement, right? The Find My feature to help you find items. And it would have made sense if Apple had a feature that would help you find your lost Siri remote. Well, 9to5Mac has discovered that if you ask Siri in the current version of iOS to find my remote or find my Siri remote, you do get a response that says no remotes are linked to your iCloud account. So that makes it seem like that at least there might be the possibility of a feature for finding the Siri remote. And other queries like for an Apple Pencil or other items that cannot be added to Find My come back with a different phrase. It says the device of that type basically can't be set up in the Find My app. So it does seem to indicate that Apple was at least maybe thinking about a Find My capability for the Siri remote, and whether they've added it or not to this current version of the Siri remote is a little bit unclear at this point. But when you look at the specs for the Siri remote, it did not specifically mention it having Apple's U1 chip, which I think would be key for this kind of feature. Also, they didn't talk about it at the event. And by the very fact that the event was very much focused on AirTags and the Find My app, it seems odd that they would have left it out if that was actually a feature that was going to be in the Siri remote. So there seems to be a lot of indications that Apple's thinking about it. Whether or not this current version of the Siri remote will have that feature, I guess we're going to have to wait to find out. The Apple TV Plus and the Siri remote went on sale on pre-order on April 30th, so they'll start arriving in folks' hands. May 21st is, I think, the delivery date. Actually, I know it's the delivery date because I ordered my new Apple TV Plus, or Apple TV rather, excuse me, and it's going to be coming on that date. So I will be giving you my thoughts and a review of that product once I have it, and I will be testing out that Siri remote. So if it is able to be added to the Find My app, then we certainly will find out. And again, I think that would be a killer feature. I don't know why they would have left that out. It definitely should have been built into that remote. And if it is there, that's going to be freaking awesome. It's also worth noting what the new remote lacks in terms of features, and a number of folks pointed out, and I didn't really think about it at the time, that the new remote is not going to have accelerometers or gyroscopes in it, which means that it's not going to be able to be used as a game controller like the current Siri remote can. So there's a number of games that leverage the Siri remote and that functionality, and you're not going to have that with the new Apple TV or the new Siri remote. So if you do play those types of games, what's going to happen is when you launch it with your new Apple TV, or if you pair a new Apple TV or Siri remote with your Apple TV, you'll get a little message saying that the game is not compatible and that you are going to need an MFI compatible game controller or an Xbox or PlayStation game controller. So if you have one of those lying around from a current Xbox or PlayStation system, you can actually pair those up with your Apple TV, or you can just get one of Apple's many made-for-i compatible game controllers that are out on the market. But just something to be aware of if you are considering getting a new Siri remote. And then finally, in the news for this week, there are rumors coming from music industry sources that say Apple is getting ready to launch a new hi-fi tier for Apple Music. So higher quality audio, something that some of Apple's competitors have been focusing on recently, and Apple may be wanting to jump into that game. The announcement will happen, they say, in the, quote, coming week, along with an announcement for new updated third-generation AirPods. That's something we've been hearing about as well, that Apple has been prepping new AirPods, although most of the other rumors that are out there right now say the new AirPods are not going to be coming until sometime in the fall. So that throws a little bit of question on this rumor, though 9to5Mac did find mentions of Dolby Atmos, Dolby Audio, and lossless in the first iOS 14.6 beta release. And while Apple does have the option in the Music app to load your own lossless audio files and use those, this is the first time there has been a reference to that in the Music app. So that those references are new, and especially the Dolby Atmos, Dolby Audio references, kind of indicating that Apple may be looking to have spatial audio support for music files in the Music app. The report also did say that the new tier would have the same price point as the current individual tier. So I don't know why they're calling that a tier if it's just going to be the same $9.99 USD price point, unless maybe that means the base tier might actually be lowered in price point, which could be very interesting and could really push Apple Music further to be more competitive with some of the other services that are out on the market, although this report did not talk about that. So the timing's a little bit weird. Doesn't seem like, especially for the third generation AirPods, that those are going to be ready to go right away, not like next week, as this is sort of indicating. It does make sense that Apple would be looking to maybe up their game with the Apple Music service, bringing in higher quality lossless audio. That's something that a lot of people want. So that would keep them competitive. Whether it happens next week or sometime planned in the future, we'll have to wait and see. Definitely on the AirPods, we are expecting new AirPods that have shorter stems, a case design much more similar to the current AirPod Pros, and they would not have some of the higher end features like noise cancellation or the silicon tips, but basically the third generation AirPods. And we are expecting those to come, but they're probably going to be coming a little bit later. Now, Nikkei Asia has also reported that Apple is planning to cut AirPod production from about 25 to 30% over this year because of competition and slowing sales. What's interesting about that is it doesn't seem to jive with like the quarterly numbers we just heard about, and Apple seems to be selling a lot of AirPods. So I have to wonder if where that's coming from and where this other rumor is coming from that, you know, they're working on some new AirPods is that Apple's just cutting back production on current AirPods and they will be ramping up again when the new AirPods are getting ready to hit the market sometime probably in the third quarter. So kind of scaling back second quarter, moving forward third quarter makes a little bit more sense to me. I guess there probably is some market saturation with the AirPods, but I think a lot of folks, when they see the new ones, are probably going to want to upgrade. So we'll have to wait and see and kind of watch those numbers. But I think AirPods are going to be okay. I just don't think they're going to be coming with some new models as soon as next week. But hey, maybe we could be surprised. But with that, that is going to do it for the news for this week. Before we move on, I do want to take a quick moment and thank a show sponsor. And that sponsor is Upstart. When it comes to paying off debt, it can often feel like an uphill battle. High interest rates resulting in minimum monthly payments keeps you in an endless cycle of debt. Upstart can help you get ahead. And I can tell you what it was like when I was coming out of college. I had a ton of credit card debt. Not something I really wanted, not a fun feeling. And it was something that took me years to dig myself out of. And having an option like Upstart at that time could have been a big help and would likely have removed a lot of the challenges and stress that I had trying to pay off all of that high interest credit card debt. Upstart is the fast and easy way to pay off your debt with a personal loan all online. Whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get a simple, fixed monthly payment. And unlike other lenders, Upstart looks at more than just your credit score. They look at things like your income, your employment history, and that means they can offer smarter rates with trusted partners. With a 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate up front for loans between $1,000 to $50,000, and you can receive funds as fast as in 1 business day after accepting your loan. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/Maccast. That's upstart.com/Maccast. And don't forget to use our URL to let them know that we sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan application. Go to upstart.com/Maccast, and a big thank you to Upstart for their support of the Maccast. Let's talk a little bit about AirTag. A lot of you have been asking me questions about them. I actually received my AirTags this week, although I have to talk a little bit about the ordering process, I think, first. I actually got my order in late. Yeah, I didn't get up, right at midnight or whenever they went on sale. I kind of didn't think I would really have to, but turns out, yeah, if you didn't order them early, you're probably going to be waiting a little bit longer. I did order a 4-pack, and I went with custom engraving because I just thought it would be fun. I put a bunch of emojis on mine. And that was probably a mistake because after I placed my order date is not until almost June. The end of May, early June is when that 4-pack will be coming. So I went back online, and it turned out there was an option, at least in my area, for in-store pickup. I ordered one more AirTag, so I'm going to have a total of 5. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with 5 of them yet. But yeah, I have an extra one that I picked up at the Apple Store on launch day, which was Friday last week. So it's kind of hard to talk about AirTag because it's not a really complex product, right? It's pretty simple. So I'll talk a little bit about the design, I guess the unboxing experience, all that sort of stuff. So it comes in a nice little package. You kind of slide it out. There's a little bit of documentation, the AirTag itself, and that's pretty much it. There's no Apple sticker, nothing really fancy. You take the AirTag out. It's the white plastic shell on one side. It's got the stainless steel and engraving with the Apple logo and everything else on the other side. That's actually also the thing that you would twist off as the battery compartment. It does have a removable battery, so that's a nice feature. It feels pretty solid, great build quality as most Apple stuff is. An interesting thing when you first open it up, it has, the protective sort of sheet on there that you pull off. You've that, satisfying peel the protective layer off my Apple product sort of thing that is part of most of Apple's unboxings. But what's really cool is the last bit of it. There's a little tab that kind of is inserted into the AirTag, and when you pull that out, that actually allows it to connect the battery, and then you get a nice satisfying AirTag noise to let you know that it's working. And then after that, you just simply bring it near your device, and just like AirPods and a lot of other things, it just pops up with a little sheet, recognizes that the AirTag is near it using the NFC technology, and then allows you to register it and set it up, register it with your Apple ID or your iCloud account, and lets you pick what you're going to track with the device, so keys or luggage or whatever it might be. And the whole setup process is amazing, magical. It's very, very easy to do. And great. I would say that, looking at the AirTag itself, it's a nice design. It is pretty thick, but also pretty small. Some folks have thought it might be even a little bit smaller, but it actually turns out to be one of the smaller tracking tags that's on the market. It's actually much smaller than a Tile or the Samsung tags that are out on the market. So of course, it doesn't have a built-in loop, so you do need to get, there's no way to attach it to anything, I guess is what it comes down to. So if you're not just going to throw it in the pocket of a bag or something to track, you are going to need to pick up some sort of holder, either one of the ones from Apple or some third-party ones that are out on the market. There's actually a lot of third-party options coming, as you might imagine. So I don't think there's going to be any sort of shortage of figuring out how to attach AirTags to different items, including things like clothing or luggage or bags or what have you. So that I'm not too worried about. A lot of people are saying they wish it had kind of a built-in hole or something like that. We've even seen some people going online and drilling holes into the AirTag, and it looks like you can, but you're going to have to be very, 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 very careful about where you do that, because everything is packed tightly in there in terms of the electronics, and there's just a few key areas where it would be safe to do that. But I don't know if I'd really want to wreck one of my AirTags. I think and by wreck, I mean just visually. I looked at some of the pictures online that show the drilled hole, and I don't think it looks very good at all. So just, pick up a holder. I did pick up Apple's leather key ring holder just to try that out, and that is really, really nice. Some folks have commented on that they don't think the leather feels like Apple leather. For me, it seemed fine. It's not a lot of leather, right? It's not a big product, but what I thought was really nice is how the AirTag fit in there. It's a really great fit. It almost snaps into the back, so the leather just kind of forms around the stainless steel part. And actually, the first time I put it in there, it was kind of crooked, and it kind of locks in place, so it won't really move around once it's in there. So I was able to actually orient it so that it was perfectly aligned, vertically, so it was up and down, and it looked really nice when it's sitting in the holder. So that's good. A number of folks have already noted that, durability wise, the stainless steel is probably going to scratch up. The white plastic is probably going to scratch up, especially if it's in your pocket with other coins and keys and all those sorts of things. So that's something I think most people are going to really have to get over, or put it in some sort of case that offers full protection, or put a skin on it if you're really, really worried about it. I kind of view the AirTag as something that is meant to be banged around, and I think it's going to get scuffed up and dinged up and all that sort of stuff. So not really too worried about it. As far as the finding features and the audio, the sound is great. It's kind of high pitched. It also modulates a little bit, so it's not just one single tone, which makes it a little bit easier to find and also to hear. Had no trouble hearing it when it was across the room in other parts of the house when I was playing around with the sound feature. The tracking feature, if you have an iPhone 11 or an iPhone 12, you can use the precise location feature, and that works really, really good. I think once you kind of get close to the area of where the device is, it can be somewhat tricky. It actually can detect up and down. So when you're hovering over it, basically I had my kids hide it a few times and tried to find it throughout the house just by using the precision location feature. And it can be a little bit tricky once you get close. But you do eventually find it. But that's why also there's a easy button, a little speaker button where you can hit and get the audio. About the only complaint I have about the audio feature is that it sort of works like the Find My iPhone feature, the audio feature that's on an Apple Watch. So you may or may not know, if you have an Apple Watch and it's paired with your iPhone, in the control center on your Apple Watch, you can press a button and it plays sound on your iPhone to help you locate your iPhone. That sound only plays like one time. And it's a very similar situation for the sound with the AirTag. It plays, I think, one or two times, just a couple times, and then stops. So if you don't find it right away, you kind of have to hit the button again. And I kind of wish there was an option where you could just keep playing the audio until you found the item with the AirTag. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And that's pretty much it. Of course, you can do things like put it into lost mode if you actually lose it. I haven't been able to test that yet, because it turns out when you put it in lost mode, well, I'm able to put it in lost mode, and it basically allows you to add contact information like a phone number. And then if someone were to find it, they could use the Find My app, or if they were on an Android device, they could hold it near the product and it would take them to a website and give them your information so you could potentially get your item back. But it turns out when you put it in Find My mode, if you're already connected to or near the item, it's smart enough to know that it's not really lost, and it never really goes into the full lost mode. At least I haven't been able to get it to go into lost mode, and I think that's why. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more testing, maybe put some, have somebody take it out further away, put it in lost mode. I did watch some videos. It sounds like for it to start showing up once it's in lost mode generally takes about 15 minutes. It does have to get near other iPhones or other iOS items that are, on registered with iCloud, or iDevices, I guess, that are registered with iCloud. So that can take a little bit of time. But overall, really, really great product. I'm very satisfied with it. I think it's very price competitive with some of the other trackers that are out there. And if you're in the Apple ecosystem, I think it's kind of a no-brainer if this is the sort of thing that you're looking for. Now, I have received a lot of emails from people who are just going, I don't really have a use case or a need for AirTags. And I think that's going to be pretty common. So it's one of those products that kind of fits a little niche. It's kind of fun. It's great that it sort of integrates with the whole Find My ecosystem. And I think, again, it's going to be very, very popular, but I can totally see and feel how some folks are going to go, it's just not something I need. And I think that's okay, right? Not everybody's going to need AirTags, but if you are the type of person who often loses their keys, or you have luggage and you travel a lot and you want to be able to track that, I think this is a really good, attractive option. So now that AirTags are out on the market, we are getting a few more technical details about them that we haven't heard or we hadn't heard before. One interesting thing that I read was that no more than 16 AirTags can be paired to a single Apple ID. Now, that's a lot of AirTags. I don't imagine that myself, I'm going to have a need to track 16 items, but I can imagine that there are people out there that might want to go that high and maybe even higher. So not really sure why they have that limit per se. Also, there have been some teardowns, and a lot of people had been wondering, how does the sound work? Because it doesn't really have an external speaker. It actually has an IP67 dust and water rating, so it can actually be submerged underwater for, I think, at a meter up to 30 minutes with that rating. And to do that, you got to make sure there's not too many areas where water can get into the AirTag. So the question was, well, how does it make sound? And it looks like from the teardowns that there is a big speaker on the plastic part. So when you take the back cover off, the plastic area behind the battery, right in front of where the electronics is, if you pop that out, which you need a tool to do, basically take it apart, there is a magnet on that side and then a coil on the side that is the round sort of plastic cover that I guess technically would be the front of the AirTag. I'm not really sure if the stainless steel is supposed to be the front. That feels like the back to me. So I'm going to call the plastic shell the front. And basically that plastic shell, it seems like, is what's acting as the speaker, which is pretty cool. So the whole thing, very, very compact for sure. And so, that's pretty much it. The other thing that I'm kind of getting from the community, a lot of questions and confusion, I think, about what the use case for AirTag is, like what AirTags are for. And I think a big part of that confusion comes really from Apple and their marketing. And I think the biggest area of confusion that people have is that AirTags would be used to track stolen items. And it's definitely not that type of product. It's definitely a product that's meant to track lost items. And while that might sound like the same thing, I think there is a subtle distinction. And basically what it comes down to is it's not very good for tracking stolen items because it's very easy to thwart. I mean, one thing is you could just find the AirTag, rip it off, and throw it away. Another thing is that you can remove the battery, which basically disables the AirTag, and it's not that hard to take the battery out because you don't even need any tools. You just basically push and twist on the back cover and the battery comes off. There are some third-party cases that are starting to come out that put the AirTag in a protective case. I saw one that actually uses the hex screws. So that would make it slightly more difficult, I think, for a thief to remove or disable. But again, they could just remove it from the item and toss it. So you have to imagine this is really about helping you recover lost items, not so much helping you recover stolen items. So if that's your use case, you're probably going to want to look for something else. I would imagine, I guess, that there are scenarios where you might be able to hide an AirTag in a place, especially within a bag that maybe a thief wouldn't find or wouldn't be aware of. So maybe in that use case scenario, it could work to help recover stolen items, but I don't think that's really what Apple had in mind. And I think that's a big area of confusion. Also, it's not meant to track pets or people. Apple actually came out publicly and said that, that wasn't the intention. They mentioned that if you want to track your kids, you probably should, get them an iPhone or an Apple Watch. Of course, people going, well, yeah, you want us to spend more money. And yeah, maybe that's the case. But really, the AirTags are designed for tracking items. And Apple says they're for tracking items, and that is pretty much it. And they do have a lot of privacy, or as much as possible, privacy and security, features built into them to try and prevent unwanted tracking. There's been a lot said about that. One of the new bits of information that came out was how that sort of works. So If you're carrying around a tracker that isn't registered to your devices or your Apple ID, when it will notify you, it'll basically notify you, hey, you've been walking around with an AirTag that's not yours. It will notify you when you get home or when you go to a place that you frequently visit. And that only works if you have an iPhone or an Apple device. Unfortunately, that feature would not work for Android users. So just something to be aware of. And like I said, AirTags, they can be reset physically. So if you were to want to give away your AirTag or give it to someone else, you do need to unpair it or remove it from your iCloud account. But then also for someone to be able to repair it with a different device, you do have to reset it. So two ways to do that. You can either physically unpair it before you give it away, but say you forgot to do that, there is actually a physical reset procedure that you can go through that actually involves removing and replacing the battery like 6 times. So it's not very easy to do, but that does reset it and allow the AirTag to be paired with another device. Now, that pairing will actually only work, though, if you've removed the AirTag from your iCloud account. So if you've never done that, it is basically locked to that iCloud account and it won't allow it to be repaired or used with another device. So that's another kind of security feature to make sure that if someone steals your AirTag, they can't just like reuse it and pair it up with their device. It'll basically be useless. So I would imagine that will deter theft a little bit, because that was something that I wondered about too, is like, you would think that you're going to have people probably just stealing AirTags off people's products just to get them. But that isn't possible. And then if an AirTag is away from its paired iPhone for 3 days or more, it will start to emit a sound. That is another thing that I kind of wonder about, though, as people are, maybe separating or losing items with AirTags. Are we going to have like little beeping things all around us and constantly be finding and hearing AirTags? I guess that's ultimately the point, right? So that you can recover and get your stuff back. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see like how many items have AirTags on them and how many get lost and sort of are beeping here and there and stuff like that. It's just something I've been wondering about with these kinds of features, but it's all new and it'll be interesting to see how people feel about them, how they react to them. We're already starting to get some of that. So far, I've been very impressed with the AirTags. Again, it's a simple product. I don't know. There's not a lot of expectations behind it. It does what Apple says it does, and that's pretty cool. And they look nice. It'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing the clever ways that people have to attach them to different things. And I'm sure we'll be getting a lot of DIY stuff. And it's always fun when a new Apple product comes out to see how people in the community react and use them. So I would love to hear actually from any of you who have been playing around with AirTags. And what are your thoughts and impressions? And have you seen any creative ways that people are actually working out attaching them to different devices? Like, I thought there's got to be some sort of way to either epoxy or super glue rather than drilling a hole, but sort of epoxy a little loop or something right on to the AirTag. And I'm surprised we haven't seen anybody do something like that yet. I guess it would come down to having a really solid connection, because you wouldn't want that to break off and the AirTag to just get lost all on its own. But I'm sure somebody's going to come up with something. So I'd love to see clever thoughts and ideas like that. If anybody has run across anything, please share it with us. Send me an email, maccast@gmail.com. We've talked a little bit on the last couple episodes about iTunes content or purchase content from Apple. So you buy a movie, you buy some music from Apple. What happens with that? Do you really own it? Can you actually give it away? Can you sell it? Can you resell it? All those sorts of things. And the reality is that the answer is pretty much no. And we talked about the fact that, if you were to pass away, you can't will your Apple content, your movies and your music that you've purchased off to another person. And we talked about all the reasons behind that. Well, something else came up this past week, somewhat related. A couple of lawsuits, actually. And I generally don't talk about lawsuits on the Maccast because, one, they don't really interest me, and two, they're boring. Let's just talk about it. There's lots of lawsuits that go on all the time. People are suing Apple all the time, and it's just not something that I enjoy. So I don't generally cover it here on the Maccast. But there's a couple of lawsuits happening right now that Apple's facing that are kind of related to this conversation we've been having about ownership of content and sort of your rights and your access to that media that you've actually purchased. And I think it's relevant because it brings up a reminder that, hey, if you are buying content, music or movies through Apple, you do want to make sure that you have local copies of that you're not just relying on Apple's library in the cloud to get that content. You want to have local copies because here's the deal. License agreements change, content can come and go from Apple's service, and if you don't have a local copy of that content, you could lose your access to it. And that's what's happening with these lawsuits. There could be a number of different ways you could lose access to it. One would be that that the content gets pulled, that Apple no longer has a license for it. They can't have it on their service. They can't sell it anymore. And then it would go away and you wouldn't be able to re-download it from your account. And that has happened to people. They've lost access to content. Another way could be something happens with your iTunes account or your Apple ID or your iCloud account, and you no longer are able to access that. And in the case of one of these lawsuits, Apple actually, and I couldn't find the reason why, they actually shut down someone's account or revoked their account. And this guy supposedly had like $25,000 worth of movies and content that he had purchased from Apple, and that's why he filed a lawsuit. But this isn't as much about the lawsuit as a reminder that, hey, you do want to keep local copies of your purchased content because you can lose access to them. So in the music and TV apps, you want to make sure that at least on one device, probably your Mac, that you go in and you use that download button to download that purchased content, get it stored and saved locally on your Mac, and then more importantly, make sure that you're backing that content up and you're archiving it. So I actually do this with my entire media library, and I always make sure when I purchase a new movie or purchase an album or a song that I do download it to my local Mac. It goes into my media library, and then I use ChronoSync and some setup there to actually archive it to my Drobo. And then also, of course, I have my cloud backup through Backblaze that also backs up my media library and anything that's in it to the cloud. So I have multiple backups in multiple locations. And that means should I ever lose access to any of that content, say one of the movies that I purchased is no longer available for sale by Apple, I would still have that, and in theory, I think still be able to play it. Now, the one thing that's never been clear to me about this is that even if you have a local copy and the studio is no longer licensing it to Apple, will you still be able to authorize and play it? And the answer to that seems like yes, at least according to Apple's support article, because they say, hey, you need to download your content. And as a matter of fact, it was interesting, as a defense in one of these lawsuits, Apple was trying to have the lawsuit thrown out, and a claim they made was that, quote, no reasonable consumer would believe that the content they purchased through iTunes would be available on the platform indefinitely. And I think a lot of people have that assumption. They believe that if they buy something and it's in Apple's catalog, that it's going to be in Apple's catalog and available to them all the time. Apple tried to make that argument. The judge actually disagreed and is allowing that lawsuit to continue. Again, not a big fan of lawsuits. So, if you want to follow that, it is ongoing. We're not really going to cover it and figure out what happened with that on the Maccast, unless maybe it changes how Apple has to do things. But The reality is, again, you're going to want to make sure that you back up your content, your purchase content. So don't forget to do that. Make sure you have local copies, and you should be okay. And like I said at the top of the show today, a lot of questions about media and media libraries and those sorts of things in this episode today. The next question I received via email, and it was a question about merging photo libraries. Basically, we have a member of the Maccast community who has a main photo library that has the majority of his photo content. And he recently received another photo library that was a bunch of old photos that I would assume had been scanned in. It was an entire library. He's calling it the antique library. So it has a master library and an antique library. And both of those libraries have been set up very meticulously with a lot of metadata, with face data from Apple. So, in photos, you can have facial recognition, and it'll recognize people in different photos. And that's all metadata that gets put into that library and associated with those photos. And so the question was, I want to be able to not have two libraries. I want to take these two libraries and I want to merge them together. And more importantly, I want to make sure that I maintain all of that meticulous metadata, including the faces data that's already applied in both libraries. And so the question was, how can I easily do that? How can I merge these photo libraries and retain all that data? And normally my immediate answer would be, well, just get a copy of Power Photos from Fat Cat Software. That lets you manage multiple media libraries, multiple photo libraries, and they have a really great merge feature. The problem, though, is that Power Photos cannot copy faces or project data. So if you have libraries where you've used projects or you've used the faces data, that is not going to be able to be copied by Power Photos. So you really need a different solution. And it turns out, for maintaining the faces data, at least, as far as I could find from my research, there really is only one way to merge two libraries and to maintain that data. And for that, you do have to use iCloud Photo Library. And the challenge here is, of course, that you need to have enough available iCloud storage to hold both libraries. So depending upon, how many photos you have, this could be a challenge, or might end up, at least in the short term, costing you some money, because you need iCloud to actually do the merging. Now, once everything is merged, you, of course, could pull down an entire local copy with all that data and then reduce or remove your iCloud storage, but you're probably going to need to pay for some storage temporarily if you want to do this. So I'm going to walk you at a high level through the process. Not going to get into a lot of detail, but I do have a link to a great article where I found most of this information. It's over at Otherworld Computing on their blog. I will link to it in the show notes at maccast.com, and it lays out step by step how to go through this. Now, one thing that I don't think is in the OWC thing that you are probably going to be able to predict that I'm going to tell you is, before trying any of this, make sure that you have multiple full backups of all of your photo libraries. It should work out and should be fairly safe, but if things go south on you, you're going to want to make sure that you have full backups so that you don't lose any of your valuable photos or the information associated with those photos. So make sure you have full backups, double check them, make sure that you can pull files off of them, that they work. And then once you have confirmed that, then you can go and try this procedure for actually merging the photo libraries. But basically, at a high level, the way it works is you're going to take your main photo library and make sure that it is uploaded and all synced into iCloud Photos. So that means you need to make sure that you go into the photos library, you make sure that it's set up as your system library, because only the system library can actually sync with iCloud Photos. And the way you check that basically is you open up photos, you go into the preferences, into the general tab. And if you see the button that says use as system photo library and it's clickable, you have not set up that library as your system photo library. You need to click that button. That will make it the system photo library. If that button is grayed out, that means, hey, that's already your system photo library. So then you just need to turn on iCloud Photo Library if you're not already using it. So you have to check that on. And again, you're going to need to have enough storage to store your entire photo library in iCloud. So make sure that you've already purchased that storage, that you already have it available to you. And you want to make sure it's enough for both libraries or all the libraries that you're wanting to merge, because you could do this with multiple libraries. But check that box. Make sure it's syncing. You're also going to want to make sure that you've set up the option to download originals to this Mac. So do this on the main Mac where you're going to do your backups and you want all the original photos to live locally. And then once you've enabled everything, you're going to sit back and wait. You're going to wait for everything to sync. And just be aware, depending upon the size of your library, this can take a long time, anywhere from days to potentially weeks, depending upon the size of your library. So you need to make sure that first main library is completely synced up into iCloud. Once that's happened, once that main library is there, you're going to quit Photos. You're going to have your second library that you want to merge the data from ready to go. You're going to relaunch the photo application while holding down the Option key. And when you do that, it will give you the option to select a different library. So you'll select the second library, the one you want to merge into the first library that you uploaded, and then you're going to repeat all of the steps, setting up that library now as the main system library, checking the box to upload all of those photos into iCloud. That's going to merge those photos in iCloud and all of their metadata, including the faces data, up into iCloud, and then again download everything on to your local Mac. And you're going to again wait for that process to happen, wait for everything to sync up to iCloud, and then once that's all done, you should have both libraries merged into iCloud. And you can verify that through the web interface. So you could log in, make sure that both libraries are there, all the data is synced up, all the photos are there. And once you've verified that, then finally you're going to go back to your main library, again, holding down the Option key while opening up the photo app. And you're going to reset that back to your main system library, and you're going to wait for iCloud to pull down and sync all of that merged library onto your Mac. And then at that point, you should be done. You should have a full merged library with all of your metadata, your faces data, all that data intact. And that's basically the process. And that's how you can go through it. Any other process like copying or exporting, that's going to be a lot quicker and faster, but just be aware you're not going to be able to maintain all of that data. From the research that I've done, and unless somebody in the Maccast community comes back and lets me know of a different way to do this, or maybe there's another tool out there that I wasn't able to find, this was the only process I could find that would specifically maintain the faces data. So hopefully Lewis was the Maccast listener who sent in that question. Hopefully, Lewis, this helps you out, and hopefully it helps out some other members of the community that might be looking to do something similar. And then finally, in the Maccast for this week, moving from the photo library to the podcast library, I received this question from Danny, who's looking for a little bit of help in migrating from the old iTunes library to the new podcast library in Mac OS. And here's what Danny had to say.
Hello, Adam. This is Danny from Arkansas, longtime Maccast listener. I have a question about podcasts, which I know is something dear to your heart. I would like to get some advice, some help, possibly seek any information I can get from you or from the Maccast community on changing, updating to Catalina and how podcasts are handled after that. The problem is that I use iTunes now. I subscribe to podcasts. Most of these are video podcasts, so they're, take up quite a bit of space. So I subscribe, they download automatically. They're stored on the iTunes library on an external hard drive, which works wonderful. I can then watch them through home sharing on another Mac or the Apple TV through the Computers app. And it works fine. But now Catalina has thrown a big wrench into this. They don't use the library, the iTunes library, the same as before. It does as far as music goes, and I believe the movies. They're all still in the same iTunes library and will use the same iTunes library you have, even on an external drive. And you can set that in the settings just as you could in iTunes, but not so in podcasts. So my problem is if I upgrade to Catalina, I can no longer store my subscription of podcasts on the external drive in this iTunes library that I currently have. So what it wants to do is create your podcast library on some obscure library folder on the Mac, which you went over this a few episodes ago. I think it was at the beginning of the year or so. And, there's no name that makes sense anymore. So instead of having a nice list of podcasts, each in their own folder by title, with the title of the episode being there and the proper dates and all, it's all gone and it's just thrown into some obscure folder, which makes no sense and not easy to work with. So that's not going to work for me. I can't move a terabyte's worth of stuff onto the Mac and then have it in some hidden folder like that. That's just not going to work out. So what have others done to get around this problem? Any information you can pass along would be very helpful. Look forward to hearing back. Love the Maccast. Thank you for all your hard work.
Hey, Danny, I don't know if you're going to want to thank me after you hear my answer to this one because, I'm kind of at a loss. Everything you've described with the new podcast app is exactly the way Apple has it set up. They basically don't let you control or move where the podcast library is anymore. And you're absolutely right. We covered this on the Maccast a while back. I'll just remind folks, basically with Mac OS Catalina and Big Sur and the podcast app, podcasts are stored in a cache folder that's in your home folder, in the library folder, inside a folder called Group Containers, in a folder that's titled 243lu875e5.groups.com.apple.podcasts. And then inside there's a bunch of other folders, and eventually you'll find the downloaded or saved podcasts. And even those are renamed. The files are renamed with some sort of cryptic hash kind of file name. And it makes it very, very hard to manage and understand. And no one knows, or I'd love to have somebody at Apple explain to me why it's like this, why they felt that this is where podcasts should be. The only thing I can think of is that they really don't view podcasts as something that anybody wants to download or save. They just kind of feel like they're ephemeral, and really what people want to do is just listen to them and move on. So you're just going to stream them. You're just going to, pull them down from wherever they are, from the RSS feed, wherever they're hosted, stream them one time and kind of toss them away. Now, the kind of contradiction to that, of course, is the update that Apple added with this last round, this update to the podcast app, where they now have the ability to bookmark or save them, and they go into a saved section. But as you pointed out, Danny, that means that they're stored locally on the local Mac hard drive. And as we know, Apple has been pushing hard drive sizes down. I mean, the base models of the new M1 Mac Mini, the new M1 machines, basically across the board, only have 256 gigabytes of storage. So if you're downloading a ton of video podcasts, that's going to eat up your storage very, very quickly. And to not have the option to move that library onto an external volume is a huge, huge mistake on Apple's part. It's a huge miss, and you're absolutely right. It doesn't make any sense because it works that way in the TV app. It works that way in the music app. Why is it not working that way in the podcast app? The fact that that wasn't part of this last update is baffling to me. And it sounds like it's baffling to you as well. And I think baffling to a lot of people in the community. So hopefully Apple is listening. I think we probably all need to go give them feedback and tell them this is dumb. But until then, yeah, I don't know of any really great solution for your issue. But maybe our community does. And that's the great thing about the Maccast community is somebody might actually have the answer to this. I was looking, to see if maybe you could set up a situation where you have an aliased folder or something like that. But as we've known from past solutions, you might be able to make that work, but it generally breaks inside Apple stuff. There's probably some really deep level hacky way of doing it, but it tends to be very fragile. And then when you do updates or upgrades, things can break and go south and get wonky. And it's generally not a lot of fun to manage. So there might be that kind of solution out there, and maybe that's the only way to go. But a better recommendation that I would have for you is just dump Apple's podcast app. If Apple's podcast app is not doing what you need it to do, there's a lot of great third-party apps out there, and you can try some of those and play around with them and see if they meet your needs. I know that Downcast, which is one of my favorite alternative podcast apps to Apple's podcast app, does let you set the location of your media downloads folder. So with that app, you can tell it, hey, my library, all my downloads should be stored on an external drive, and here's where the external drive is. So I don't know if Downcast would work for your needs. Apple's podcast app is nice because it syncs between all your devices. Downcast does have an iOS version of their app and syncing and all that stuff. So you're probably going to have to play around with a couple third-party apps, but that's probably the way to go at this point until Apple fixes their podcast app. And I really do see the fact that you can't move the library as something that's actually broken in Apple's podcast app, at least on the Mac. Now, I was trying to get more creative and think of other ways where you might be able to handle this. I know one of the features you talked about really enjoying with the old iTunes way, especially with video podcasts, this is really handy, is the ability to use home sharing. And that goes away because the podcast app does not participate in home sharing. Now, the TV app does and the music app does. So I thought, well, maybe one way you could kind of work around this is maybe use a tool like Hazel, which allows you to watch certain folders and watch that weird podcast folder location for audio and video files being saved into those folders. And then you could have Hazel actually copy those to another folder where you could then take them and then add them to the TV app or to the music app, and then go into those apps and set up and update the metadata and organize them within those apps. And then your videos, for example, could show up in the home movies section of the TV app. And with home sharing, you could make that available to your other devices and to your Apple TV and all that stuff in the same way that you did when your library was in iTunes. And home sharing does still exist on the Mac and with iOS devices and Apple TV with macOS Catalina and Big Sur. And a lot of people don't know this because the settings actually got moved. So media sharing is now part of the main system preferences. You used to, I think, set it up inside iTunes. Now you need to go to system preferences, you go to sharing, and you'll turn on media sharing. And then within media sharing, you can check the box for home sharing. And then you'll want to enter your Apple ID, and you want to make sure you use the same Apple ID and log in on all your devices that are going to participate in home sharing. And then within the individual apps, either the TV app or the music app on iOS or Apple TV, you need to go into the settings and make sure that you set up home sharing, you turn it on, and you use the same Apple ID. But once you've done that, inside the TV app or inside the music app, you should be able to now see the home sharing section of your library and then access all your content from there. So one way I think of is you could actually physically move your media files out of the podcast app and put them back into the individual apps, music, for audio podcasts and the TV app for your video podcasts. But again, managing all of that and setting up the metadata and keeping everything together, yeah, that's going to be very cumbersome. It's not going to be a lot of fun to manage, but you probably could work out a system like that. You might be able to automate it with a few tools, like I said, with maybe some automator scripts and Hazel and some other things, but you might have to cobble together your own solution. And again, maybe someone in the Maccast community has already come up with something or knows about some third-party app that I am totally unaware of. So they might have the solution. And so, Danny, hopefully you came to the right place. If you are in our community and you can help Danny out, shoot me an email, send me an audio comment, let me know a creative solution for working through this problem, and we will share that on a future episode of the Maccast if we can come up with something. But yeah, for right now, I would beg and plead and send, apple.com/feedback, go there and tell them how disturbing this is that we can't control our podcast library anymore. They've kind of taken control of it, and it's not a good thing. But again, luckily, there's a lot of great third-party apps out there too. So I'm sure members of our community will have great recommendations for third-party apps as well. So send your emails, your audio comments to maccast@gmail.com. But with that, that is going to do it for this episode of the Maccast. Before I leave you, I do want to thank my show sponsor, Smile, makers of Text Expander and PDF Pen, both for iPhone, iPad, and Mac OS. You can get more information and details on all of their great software by visiting smilesoftware.com/podcast. Bandwidth for the Maccast is provided by Cashfly. You can find them at CACHEFLY.com. And all advertising on the Maccast is handled by Backbeat Media. You can find them at backbeatmedia.com. As always, I love hearing from you. If you have a comment, a question, something you'd like to hear covered on a future episode of the Maccast, you can send your emails and audio comments to maccast@gmail.com. You're also welcome to call in on the listener hotline and leave a voicemail. That phone number, 281-622-4269, 281-MAC-I-AM-9. And if you need show notes, links to anything that I talked about on this or any other episode of the Maccast, you'll find those on the website. That's at maccast.com. And finally, if you want to follow me on social media, you can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/Maccast. You can check out the Maccast Facebook page over at facebook.com/TheMaccast, or find me on Instagram, Maccast over there. But that is going to do it for now. Until next time, I will talk to you all again real soon.